Hello again, ladies and gents. Welcome back to the AJ Roberts Show. Today we have Mr. Jason Noble joining us from the Awareness Foundation and his own business In One Place. I wanted to get him on the show today to go through massive topic really that's on the end of a lot of people's tongues, which is finance. Where is things sitting now? What do things look like in the future? And what steps can we really take to kind of make sure we're in a better place than we are now and not get caught blindsided by sudden regulations and government policies that they may try to bring in, and obviously how things are being affected around the world. Jason, welcome to the show, mate.
Welcome. Thanks for having me on.
So if we just touch on the Awareness Foundation, because that's something that you've had going for around about a year. Obviously, it started through obviously all of the mess that we found ourselves in. What was the reasoning behind sort of starting the Awareness Foundation?
When COVID kicked off, I got locked down in Spain. I went over there for 10 days and got locked over there for 5 months and basically was stranded in Spain on my own. It was a pretty heavy lockdown. I nearly got arrested for going to the local chemist. And so I actually set up a group called Common Sense, trying to find anybody still had any sort of, and I got banned on Facebook. I got banned everywhere. I couldn't get a community of people together because everyone was trying. It didn't work. Eventually I sort of got onto Telegram, started a group on there, and it didn't really gather that many people with common sense. We ended up with all the white noise that you have on Telegram, and I just got a bit frustrated with it. So eventually we wanted to sort of take the good people that we'd met on there and then create something where we could actually sort of have more organized structure of actually trying to make people aware of some of the stuff that people weren't maybe aware of, or where they were aware of it but didn't know what to do about it. So people were going, hold on a sec, that doesn't make sense, but hadn't got really much of a clue of what to do about it. And it just led us to have a very simple sort of mechanism of explaining to people things to make them more aware, and then trying to offer solutions to those problems, whether that was how to meet people up and how, understanding what's going on in the banking world and the financial world and blah, 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 blah. We ended up doing a thing called Hold the Line, where we sort of tried to replicate a thing that was done in the Baltics in sort of I think it was the late 80s, when towards the end of communism, they did a thing called the Baltic Way, where the people actually held hands for like 600 kilometers across 3 countries, and we tried to replicate a similar thing. It didn't work out. People kept telling us, you can't go on the roads, don't affect the traffic. So maybe I should have got the truckers on side at that point, but yeah. Basically we ended up doing it in about 50 different cities, and there was lots of people holding hands across sort of different cities and things. So we've done quite a few bits and pieces about trying to get people together and spreading awareness, really.
No, that's amazing. And obviously that's grown quite considerably over the year, and you're sort of venturing off into different areas. Obviously your main background comes from like the financial sector. Is that obviously what In One Place is all evolved around?
It isn't. I mean, In One Place was, I started to get a little fed up with what I was doing about 5-6 years ago, and I started to build a community. I've done a lot of networking over the years. I've traveled quite to a lot of countries, and I decided to build my own networking platform because I don't really like social media. I started to realize back then that Facebook and Google were like constantly spying on you and looking at everything you do. I think it's become very apparent to many people, the censorship problems and things that are out there now. And pretty much we built a community for an online and an offline sort of basis of where we don't have algorithms. We're not like invading people's privacy. So In One Place was basically a way to network in a better fashion and being able to communicate with each other without people sort of snooping into what you're doing every 5 minutes. And that sort of, it's been a bit of a pet project. I very much got stuck into it when I got locked over in Spain because I couldn't really do anything else. So I gave it a lot more attention, and it's sort of pretty much my sort of main thing now. And we've added in elements of finance into the community. Things like we've built our own bank, we've built our own private currency. So the ability for people within the community to trade with one another without actually having to use the sort of, say, government systems. We've acquired some sort of holding in a precious metal store, and we've recently just acquired a part ownership in a gold mine as well.
No, that's awesome. And quite similar to JFK, like he went to go rogue, didn't he, away from the Federal Reserve. So be careful.
Yeah, there's only a few people that have sort of tried to build a currency backed by something. JFK was one of them.
Yeah. So don't
Yeah,
be driving around in soft top cars in
yeah,
big
yeah.
crowds, right?
Abraham Lincoln was another one. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a bit of a dangerous sport.
Yeah, it is. I know I've been learning quite a lot about it over the last couple of years, like how deep it all goes, to the whole Federal Reserve and like,
Yeah,
the Rothschilds involvement.
Colonel Gaddafi was another one.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy when you actually read into all this, is that how kind of sinister it all really is.
Very much so.
So with the currency, like, you mentioned there, just you can't be your own currency. Like, how simple or hard is it?
It's not as difficult as it sounds. I mean, when I first started it, I really hadn't got a clue where to start, and I just started. We researched the history of money. We just looked into how does currency get created, and then what makes it work, what makes it fail. Because currencies have. I actually watched a really good presentation from a guy called Mike Maloney called "The Hidden Secrets of Money," and it's really eye-opening sort of documentary. It's not a very long watch; it's half an hour sort of episodes, about 10 episodes. But when you watch that, you realise that actually it's not what you think it is. Currency is effectively a pieces of paper that are supposed to be backed by something, and when currencies work, they are backed by something. So like gold or silver, or years ago it was even pieces of marble and various bits and pieces. But effectively, currencies they start off life backed by something, and then governments come along and take that backing away, and then it becomes what's called fiat currency, which is basically a piece of paper backed by nothing. And usually those pieces of paper get printed at will. Governments just, well, it's not even governments that actually do it, it's actually central banks, but they print this money and sort of stick it into the system, which creates inflation, which basically devalues the pieces of paper. And then eventually people lose trust in those pieces of paper, and they usually get eroded and disappear. Whenever you get a cycle of that happening on a grand scale, unfortunately, you usually have quite a lot of conflict at the end of that sort of cycle. So the US dollar is about 50 years old right now, and is the sort of main currency of the world. All the other currencies are technically pegged to it. When they originally pegged to it, which was just after the Second World War, gold was backing the US dollar. But in the 70s, the US took away that peg because the French actually parked a gunboat in New York Harbor and went, "Give us our gold." And the Americans went, "We can't." And they basically debased the currency. And then you pretty much ended up with a world of pieces of paper floating around. And a lot of people think of money as the pieces of paper in your pocket, but actually it's the currency, and the currency represents what's supposed to be the money behind it. And the money is a store of value that someone trusts. Take that away, that store of value, you've got pieces of paper basically.
Yeah. And so in that, it's kind of an illusion, really, isn't it?
One very big one. I mean, if you think about it, if you own the printing press, you've got an unfair disadvantage. The US currently is around, I mean, this is the numbers that they put on their file. There's about $30 trillion in debt. They take about $4 trillion in tax every year, so, or in their GDP. So you've got a scenario there where they are grossly over owing them more than they can take it. If the Americans stopped paying, it would take them about 15, 20 years to basically pay off their money if they just stopped paying tomorrow. Now, that is just lunacy. And the issue is that every year they have to pay the interest on the money that they've borrowed, and the money that they're borrowing is coming from a central banking system. So the central banking system prints the money, lends it to governments or lends it to banks, charges interest for the privilege, and then the government owe the money back, and the people pay that bill. So it's just a self-perpetuating problem. And the easiest way to understand it is, like, if, for example, if I create the first dollar tomorrow and I lend it to you, and I say pay me back with interest, where does the interest come from? You've only got $1, so where do you get it from? So I have to make another dollar, lend it to you, and now you take that dollar and pay me back. So then you need some more money to keep paying it. So it just self-perpetuates. But if you're the guy with the printing press, you've effectively got an unfair disadvantage over everyone else.
So in essence, if we had the ability to print our own money, I could still keep printing my own money whilst charging loads of people interest on their own money.
Yeah.
And then keep lending them all this printed money.
Well, in the last 2
years,
in the last 2 years, the US has printed around $10 trillion in new money, which people sort of see those numbers as $10 trillion. I mean, this is a lot of money. I mean, people think of trillions and they hear these numbers, but the reality is this is life changing. Take hundreds of thousands of years to spend that money if you tried to spend it. So it is mental money, and they've printed that in the last 2 years. Now, that is only going to get worse, and other countries have done the same. I mean, the UK, we've printed over £1 trillion in 1 year, which has doubled our debt in 1 year. So I think countries are just throwing this money out, but how much of it is in your pocket? It's in someone's pocket, but is it in yours? And if it's not in yours, someone else got richer because that money came into their pocket. Now, that sort of split of the money is like shares in a company. If you've got 500 shares, I've got 500 shares, we own 50% of the company each. If I suddenly create another 1,000 shares and keep them, you've now got 25% of the company. If I print 1 trillion shares and keep them, how much of the company do you own?
Yeah, it's mental, isn't it? Absolutely mental.
It's unfortunately the system is one big illusion, and people just trust it because they think it works, but it only works till it doesn't. And with fiat currency, the average lifespan of a fiat currency is about 70 years. And again, in the Hidden Secrets of Money, there's I think it's episode 3, I think it is. There's a whole thing about all the currencies that have ever been created, and there's been hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, I think. And every single one of them has failed. No fiat currency has ever survived, and its average lifespan is about 70 years.
That's interesting, isn't it? We still seem to do the same thing because it's, I guess, part of what people know, isn't it? Like having something to exchange for something, or like I was having this conversation with my wife the other day. If some new system comes in but money's not a thing, because they don't want people's like daily lives and mindset to be evolved around money. Because in like Western society, if we're in this pyramid, like we're at the bottom, aren't we? And our motivation really is money because we need it to live. But I was like, if you just eradicated it, it wouldn't work. It'd have to be a crazy track. Because I mean, I got new builds being built where I live, right? If you suddenly like just disbanded money, old Jimmy's not going to get up at 7 in the morning and go on site and just go and build a house for nothing, is he?
I've had many conversations over the last year with people going, you've got to go back to bartering, you've got to go back to old systems. And you sort of think, okay, but how does that work? It is, you can only swap a hairdresser for a window cleaner so many times before you run out of your ability to be the hairdresser. So unfortunately your use will only have a limited supply to somebody else, and you might, a doctor might be able to trade themselves for more people, but the actual ability to barter doesn't really work, and it's never really ever existed in any long period of time in any economy. And currency always eventually comes back in because it's just not practical to take a cow to the newspaper shop and buy a paper with it. So you've got to then swap the value of the cow for something you can carry and swap. That becomes currency. And it generally is based around things that are rare and precious. And that's why gold and silver, for example, have been money for thousands of years, because it's hard to get hold of. It's small in supply, so you can't replicate it too much. So if you back it by something like that, then you've effectively limit the supply. As soon as you take that back in away and it goes nuts, it becomes fiat, and then you're back to square one again.
Yeah. So obviously in terms of precious metals, we talk about gold and silver quite a lot. For somebody looking to move their money around, so to speak, would gold and silver be 2 precious metals you'd recommend people invest in?
Yeah, I mean, I was always very, I wouldn't say anti-precious metals, but I couldn't see the point. They've always sort of never really done a lot, but actually they do what they're supposed to do, but over a long period of time. So, I mean, to give you some quick statistics, if you bought a 1 kilo bar of gold in 1960, it would have cost you about £500 to buy it then. A 1 kilo bar today would cost you £45,000 to buy. So if you think about it, it's still a 1 kilo bar. It's the same as your house. Your house costs the same. It's no different. It's just a house. It's just a bar of gold, but you need more pieces of paper to buy it. So that's inflation for you. People go, the gold's inflated or the house is inflated, but actually what it is your pieces of paper have deflated. This spending power has gone backwards. So the issue with that is that then, if you hold your money or your store of wealth in something that doesn't deflate the same way, then as over time it goes up. So, I've completely changed my thinking with regards to how you should store wealth over the last 4 or 5 years with some of the research I've been doing. And precious metals have been money for a long period of time for a good reason, because it's one of the only things that you can actually have that is very scarce and difficult to make. Yeah.
It's something I've heard a lot of people talk about at the minute, because obviously there's crisis going on all over the world. It's not just centralized, it's happening all over the place, affecting financial systems everywhere. Where do you see things going in the next 12 months?
I've been doing a series of talks over the last couple of years. Well, for the last 3-4 years, I looked into when we building a private currency. In the process of doing so, we actually decided to have an asset-backed currency. So we needed somewhere to back those or put those assets that are backing it. And we looked into some of the biggest banks in the world, went through 10 years of their annual accounts and had some frightening statistics. I mean, things like Deutsche Bank, for example, as of the end of 2019, around 7,500 times more money than they've ever taken on deposit. JP Morgan currently, or at the end of 2019, owed 216,000 times more money than they had left in cash in the bank. It's frightening. And when we started looking into it, we decided, okay, we've got to go another direction. I fear that the banks are being set up to fail. The banks are very low on cash. They're highly over leveraged. And when COVID sort of kicked off, the Americans made an announcement about lowering the interest rates in their country to zero, just as COVID kicked off. And in the same announcement, they actually stated that the banks could actually hold their deposits to zero as well. So what they did by that, and they said this was thousands of banks. They never named the banks, but they said thousands of banks, and they actually said this would apply with the dollar swaps as well into other countries. But what they effectively did is it gave banks the ability to say, I don't have to hold your money. I don't actually have to hold anything on reserve. So if you walk into the banks and say, give me my money, they don't legally have to hold it because they changed the rules. And in addition to that, they don't have it if you wanted it because they've got so much leverage involved that they can't actually provide it. So the reality is that if pretty much if you took the top 50 banks in the world, if 1-2% of the clients walk through the door and say, give me my money today, they would all fail overnight, every one of them. And they're sort of the mechanisms that support it and back it up are just not there. People think there's these sort of safety nets that, I'll get back this or I'll get back that. But actually, the statistics on the numbers, I mean, if you take the UK, if you look at the top 5 banks in the UK, they owe about £7 trillion on deposit. And they owe about 70 times that if you look at their notional derivative positions, as in the amount of money they really would need if they had to pay everyone back. The UK government took £650 billion roughly in 2019. And yet, they've printed £1 trillion since COVID, or just over £1 trillion since COVID. Where does the money come from if the banks fail? So I fear that the banks are heading down a path where if there was ever a lack of confidence in them, and there's a number of reasons why people are getting less confidence in banks, like over in Canada, where they started freezing bank accounts for the truckers and the people that donated money to the truckers. If you saw a lack of confidence in the banks, and just look at what's going on in Ukraine and Russia at the moment, and they've frozen an entire country out of the banking system. People are going to run elsewhere, and if they try and grab their money, it won't be there. And I hear stories all the time of people going into their banks and going, I want my money out, and they can't get it, even small amounts, 10,000, 15,000 type sort of numbers.
Yeah, I mean, on that, over the short coming months, would you suggest your money being in the banks is probably not the best place?
I think banks are one challenge because you've got a scenario where again, if there was a run on any of the big banks, they wouldn't be able to meet their liabilities. And people often think that all the numbers that are on the screens, that there's pieces of paper sitting around. The days of having the banknotes, even for the amount of money that's on a screen, don't exist. You couldn't take physical cash out of the bank, even if they had it, because they haven't actually made the money. So that's another reality. But actually holding fiat currency is being depreciated quite badly. I mean, inflation's going through the roof because they're just printing money en masse, which is creating mass inflation. The published rates in the UK are about 5.5%. In the US, it's bordering up to 7% now. But reality is if people actually did a basket of goods, and I did an experiment recently where I looked at a basket of goods of about 50 items, including like a can of Coke, a bottle of water, petrol, things that you buy. And I came out around 17.5% for my basket of goods in the last 12 months, increase in price. So if inflation's sitting at 10%, you put £100,000 in the bank, a year later, you'll have £100,000 in the bank if the bank's still there. But really, you've got the spending power of £90,000. Your money's going backwards. It's being eroded with a tax that you can't even see most of the time, and you don't see because the numbers still say the same on the piece of paper.
Yes, I mean, in essence, it's like a digital currency in itself, isn't it? There's no paper backing it or nothing physically backing it or to show its worth other than the number on the screen. And it's just like a digital currency.
Yeah, the M2 money supply, which is the money we can grab hold of. There's more than one money supply, but the M2 money supply, there's probably less than 10% of the money actually in circulation in physical pieces of paper. Most of it's just numbers on a screen being moved around, and everyone goes, well, that's what I've got because it says so on the screen. But actually, can you get it if you needed it, and could you physically take it? The reality is that no is the answer to that question.
Do you think it will get that will only get worse because there's so many companies out there, like in large corporations, that are buying into the whole cashless society type situation?
I think it's even worse than that. There's obviously with COVID, there was a big attack on cash. It was dirty, and you couldn't trust it. I mean, there's more germs on a phone screen than there is on a banknote. I mean, coins are pretty grim, but banknotes aren't any more unhealthy than your mobile phone is. I mean, most people. I saw a thing the other day where someone said the modern day office, and there was a picture of a guy sitting on the toilet with a phone. And that the reality is that people's phones go everywhere with them. They're no more healthy, but yet you're convinced that your phone is the way to go, or a piece of plastic in your pocket.
You can't track someone off a £5 note, they can.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at plastic, I mean, people talk about banning plastic straws, but yet there's 14 billion credit cards on the planet. Go figure. There's 2 cards to every single person. So it's not exactly a green environment when you look at that. But paper's not the most environmentally friendly thing to do either. But ultimately, there's a big push to get rid of cash. There's a big push towards electronic payments, but more worryingly, there's a drive towards a thing called CBDC, central bank digital currencies, and that's going to feel a bit like a crypto, but delivered by the government. So it's a central bank, centralized system, and a digitized system. Now, most people will think of that and go, well, we're used to electronic currency anyway. What's the difference? But when you actually create a blockchain or a decentralized ledger type currency, it's very much programmable. You can do anything with it. Whereas with the current system, it's quite dumb. You can just move money around, but you can't really do anything with it other than block someone like the Canadians did. But with programmable money, you can literally say, well, you can put a timestamp on it. You can say, okay, you've got too much money. You need to spend 20% of your money by Friday, otherwise it's going to disappear. You could say you can't spend this in McDonald's and block the ability to make a payment in that one store. So, this has already been tried in China. China has an electronic CBDC. They gave away, I think it was about $200 million as a freebie to people. Here you go, here's free money, take this wallet and take this money and you can spend it in these stores. And everyone was like, yeah, great. But you're now tracked on everything you do, everywhere you go and everything you spend. And, if you look at some of the mandates that came in with regards to you can't go in this venue or you can't go in that venue without your vaccine passport, you're also going to have the same thing with money. And that's even more of a problem because, you can go, okay, well, I'll go elsewhere. Well, if you've got money that can only go where they tell you can go with it, that's a control system that's coming. In addition to that, there's a thing called social credit scoring, which has also been tried in China. And I mean, they literally, they watch what you're spending your money on and what type of person you are. And the IMF already stated that they believe that one of the things, and Christina Lagarde, who's the head of the IMF, is the person quoted to saying this, is that they think one of the things that should be considered when it comes to social credit scoring is your entire search history on the internet, everything you've ever done on the internet and searched for. Decide what type of person you are before you can decide whether you can have money or spend it.
There's loads of single guys there now going like, all that time I spent in those channels, you reckon they'll pay me for it?
Start advertising yourself, yeah.
But I think that you touched on the key word there, that the control and the potential element of control that one establishment can have over a large body of people is quite scary, isn't it? Because it's already happening in China. Already seen countless sort of experiences, from people who've said, like even if you jaywalk, for example, camera picks your face up straight away, bosh, money straight out your account.
Yeah, I mean, they take money out your account, but they're also then highlighting you and putting you on the news, for example, and going, there's a person that's a danger to society because they crossed the road in the wrong place. So it's mind-blowing, the actual control system. I mean, China's obviously China, but, who would have ever thought you'd be told you can't go into this venue, or you can't go into that, or you can't travel? As somebody that's traveled to, I've been to over 50 countries. I haven't moved out of this country since I got back here after getting locked down in Spain, because you just can't travel anymore. You know, it's an issue. Plug into their system and take what they want you to take. Your inability to just have what is basically a free existence is going already. So what's it going to be like if they start controlling your money as well?
Yeah, and again, because our main motivation at the bottom of this pyramid is money, because we need it to pay their mortgages and our council tax and all these other things which are completely unlawful. It does put us into this perpetual cycle of, well, doom and control. Basically, there's no other ways of really putting it, like throughout the period of your life, which is just getting worse. So we talked offline before about. Obviously, there's a lot of people around the world that have taken up investing in crypto, for example, in the last like 10 years, more so than ever. And I like you, like have had crypto, and I have crypto for a while. But I think what you mentioned about how it's becoming more apparent is a way of like priming people to get used to having a digital currency, what it looked like, how you can actually move it around, and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden they're on about bringing their own digital currency out because they clearly can't control this one, as far as we know it, on the scale, how many there are, how many cryptos there are. So by bringing in a centralized currency like they're talking about, totally makes sense how they've just been priming people to say like, oh yeah, digital currency is good. Like, so you've had it the last 10 years, mate. You know, what's wrong with this one we've got here? I think it's quite a scary prospect.
Yeah, it's crypto is a funny old thing, because a lot of people see crypto as a sort of an alternative to the monetary system, and I think when crypto first came out, I completely missed the boat. I didn't understand it at all. But I've done a lot of research when we were looking into currency, because obviously we went, well, there's a currency, we need to understand how it works. When Libra came out, when Facebook tried to create their own coin, they actually changed a lot of regulations everywhere around the world. They rewrote their regulations, and we went through all the regulations. And actually, they've actually put some very stern stuff in place. They've gone like, if you're not scarce, for example, you're illegal. If you have a monetary control system, and you're illegal. If you're raising money off the back of them, so you're selling the coins for cash and that's going in your pocket, that's considered a security. So they've sort of gone like, here's a bunch of things that we're going to put in place, time bombs, if you like. And yet they haven't really enforced it too much. Ripple got a hammer in, and XRP, that they actually got badly thrown the book at them, and there's a whole sort of story around that. But generally, the crypto sort of world's tiptoeing along, going, okay, we're the alternative space. But actually, the technology is very slow. Everyone copied what Bitcoin did in the beginning with the same technology. Ethereum was the second one, and everyone's borrowed Ethereums to create their own alternative coins. They're all sitting on the same technology, which is too slow to ever transact and be able to rival the current systems. But then in addition to that, you've got all these regulations that have been lingering under the surface the last 2-3 years. And I fear that when cryptos sort of get their real challenge, you can see it already happening. People starting to say, you got to regulate it, and we're going to tax it, and exchanges are getting asked for questions. So that decentralized system, if you can control the exchanges and other things that get you in and out of it, you can actually take away that decentralized system immediately. But my biggest fear is that when the governments bring in the CBDCs, which they're not quite ready for yet, but they're coming soon, when they come out, they can then go, well, you're illegal, and you're illegal, and you're illegal, and start shutting these things down. And you can already see the attack starting to happen. And just in the last few days, I came to my, so obviously with what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, Russia's had their systems being switched off overnight. They've gone like, take that down. They're talking about pulling out the whole SWIFT system. Now, the groundswell of opinion at the moment is very much, stand with Ukraine and get behind Ukraine. And what's happening in Ukraine is awful, and it is happening. I know people on the ground in Ukraine. There is a war going on there. They are killing people, but the reality is, I think there's a story much above that I don't think everyone understands. But the reality is that right now everyone goes, those dodgy Russians, they are the evilest people on the planet, and we've switched them off the banking system. Well, they're going to have to go somewhere else. So they're going to run to, they would have thought this through, and they're going to run to alternatives, maybe crypto being one of those things. And it's only going to take a clever leader to go, those dodgy Russians are laundering their money and buying people with crypto, and you could very easily see a sway of opinion going, "We're that thing's the black market, devils," And I fear that there's going to be some attack on crypto at some point when they want rid of it to bring in their own versions. And governments are clever because they tax you, and people don't understand how tax really works and their liability to it. Most people just think you have to pay tax. All taxes are voluntary, believe it or not. I mean, all tax, we volunteer to give them the information, we volunteer to pay it. But the reality is they go, when you pay us, you've got to pay us in our currency. So that's one of the ways that they make you have to use their currencies. You have to pay your bills with it. If you take away the requirement to pay those bills, or you choose to be able to pay them in other ways, or negotiate these contracts in different ways, you can actually step away from that system. But at the moment, we all just plug in and just go along with it, and don't ever question whether it's actually, who made up the rules, who bought.
We don't know any different though, do we? I mean, like you brought up from it by your parents, who most of the time have a mortgage, and they've had it drummed into them that you've won at life when you leave school after spending probably a good portion of a few years really, like on lessons that you're never ever going to do in your life. You leave school to work for somebody to pay, to pay your taxes. You get about 5% of your money back for yourself, and you pay your mortgage, and you've won at life. When you get to 55 and you paid your mortgage off, but then you're like, Sheila, let's go do all those things that we said we were going to do once we paid the mortgage off, climb mountains and that. But then you look down, you can't even see your toes and that because you've been on the tools, your back's knackered, knees gone, and but you've won in life because you paid your mortgage off at 55. That is like the mindset we've been put into, haven't we? This country that is obsessed with mortgages.
That whole your home is your castle thing that's been plugged into everybody for years. There's a guy I listen to a lot, Robert Kiyosaki, who wrote a book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I read that many years ago. And I wouldn't say I learned anything when I read it because I already understood his thinking. But it's a great read for anyone that's never listened to it. But the whole theory of what do you learn in school? They're two things they don't teach you in school is the law and money, for a reason. They don't want you to know. Is this actually correct? And do I have to do this? As I say, people just sort of look at governments and look at people that are making all the rules around the world, and people that influence those people, which is quite a nefarious bunch of people behind that. But they look at these people and say they have the ultimate authority over us, but never ask them, how did you get that? Where did you get that power from?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's again, you just don't ask questions either, and that's what school does to you, isn't it? It puts you into a position where just kind of like sit there in rows, put your hand up when you need toilet, ask question, seen and not heard, all that kind of stuff. And it's just a case of then you like trundle out the gates, and then you go like, well, I've got to go work for somebody now. And there's the thought of even trying to set up your own business or do anything for yourself is almost frowned upon, isn't it? Like at an early age.
People are in fear. I mean, I've been self-employed since I was at school, and over the years, the amount of people that have gone, "Oh, I wish I could do what you do," and you're like, you could, but I've got a mortgage to pay, and what happens if it doesn't work? So, people are just trained to not take risk. Ironically, when we're children, you learn to walk by falling over. Yet as soon as you become an adult, if you fall over, people laugh at you. Yeah. It's completely opposite. The minute you become an adult, everything's like, you cannot fail, you cannot do this. Whereas when you're a kid, it's like, go on, you can do it, you can do it. It's just different type of training.
Yeah, again, but it's people never really think about it in those terms, is it? Even as an adult, like I love failing. Like it's the whole point of learning. As we go along until our very last days. You're still learning. You can never know everything, can you?
You want to skid into your grave with tire marks all over you. You want to have a few battle scars, because if you haven't really lived.
Yeah, exactly. And I encourage so many people to do that all the time. I've kind of got this notion where I'm like, I see an opportunity, I'm like, am I going to die? Nah, okay, let's go. Like, and then literally just dive straight in. What's the worst that could happen? I think people need to be like much bigger risk takers. But again, this is stepping out of that comfort zone a little bit into your stretch zone, so to speak. But where do you see? For the average everyday Briton, what would your advice be for somebody over the next 12 months who's looking to sort of put their money into something that's going to maybe, I know it's quite difficult right now because everything's so volatile, isn't it? But that can maybe give them some reassurance and a bit of a safety net.
I think at the moment, people need to consider things that have some form of value. I mean, the reality is that things only have value based upon your circumstances. So, if I gave you, a ton of gold and stuck you on a desert island in the middle of nowhere with nothing other than that, you'd be like, great. And if I came along the following day and went, here's a suitcase of food, give me your gold for the food, you'd swap in a heartbeat, because you would need the food. So the reality is that things only have value based upon the current circumstances and the current situation. I've been saying for weeks, and I don't really try in any of the stuff I'm doing. I'm trying not to give advice. I'm just trying to sort of say, look, consider these things. But I sort of said, if there's a war that broke out between Russia and anyone, watch what happens to the oil price. Watch what happens to the natural gas price. Look at other energy prices. What's going to happen to them? The day that Russia invaded, gold and silver went up within the first 5 hours. It was up by 3-4%. Natural gas and gold and oil were up by 5 or 6%. Crypto dropped like a stone that day. So a lot of people are saying crypto is the way to go, as it's the new gold. But always look on a day when it's really bad and say what happened on the day when it went wrong. What happens? And crypto didn't perform well on that day. Now it's made a good recovery since, but surely confidence should turn around and say that on a day when things are a bit rough and they're switching off banking systems, that people would run to stuff. So I think it's difficult to people have always got that. People buy houses because you can touch it and feel it. It's a real thing, and it's an emotional thing to houses. It's always been the same way. But houses are very difficult. They're not very nimble. You can't pick them up and move them somewhere else if things are going wrong. But because you can touch it and feel it, people emotionally buy it. Now, it's the same thing for anything that has value. Oil has value. You can do things with it. Gold and silver, you can pick it up. It's not easy to pick it up and run down the street with it. And that's always the criticism of things like gold and silver. But right now, people, if they're trying to hold their wealth in something that's not going to go backwards, should consider things that have long-term value, things that people are going to need. And I would seriously look into the perils of being in pieces of paper, because I don't think those pieces of paper are long for this world. I would consider where you're storing it and who you're storing it with, and that it is definitely in the format of the way that you hoped it was going to be. But just be more alert, be more aware. A lot of people have no financial awareness at all, and it's never too late to learn a bit. And people are intimidated by it, saying, I don't really understand. But actually, it's quite easy to learn. You can just listen to people. There's some great people out there that you can listen to, that you can learn a bit from. And once you've learned a little bit, you can start to make more informed decisions. A lot of people just bury their head in the sand and say, I don't understand it. Well,
yeah,
you probably need to.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think now more than ever, especially if, one thing the last couple of years has taught us is we need to question everything, and basically do our homework on our current situation, and not just bury our heads in the sand and then just wait. It's almost waiting to get caught out, and then put your hands up in the air going, I don't know what to do, and that's when again responsibility out the window. But no, I find that's obviously a huge thing. Thanks for coming on the show today, mate, and expressing all of that and sharing those pearls of wisdom. Absolutely fantastic. Where can people find you if they want to find out more information?
Well, the bank that we built is called Sense Reserve, so it's sense-reserve.com. The main business is in one place, so it's inoneplace.com. The Awareness Foundation is awareness.foundation. So on any of those things, you can sort of see what we're up to. With the bank, we're sort of very much challenging the narrative of what banking should look like. We've gone back to basics. It's about protecting people's wealth. In One Place is a censorship-free community. We've got content on there that we posted on YouTube and got banned within 20 hours of posting. That's still 500,000 views going strong on there. And the Awareness Foundation is, as I say, it's about trying to help people and make people more aware of what's going on, and offer solutions and ways that people can potentially find other people that are sort of doing the same things.
Amazing. No, that's awesome, mate. And that's exactly what we need, is just get this information to people so they can make better informed decisions at the end of the day. And that's what the show's about, really. Just getting people that information so they can do with it as they please. And on that note, guys, I hope you learned something today on the AJ Roberts Show with Jason. And please, I'll put this stuff in the show notes, so make sure you get in touch if you want to learn a bit more on the financial sector. But for myself and Jason, look after yourself, boys and girls, and I'll see you very soon on the AJ Roberts Show.